Istanbul. Even before he began his first day at work as Istanbul's new mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu was being talked about as the man who could challenge President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for the leadership of Turkey in 4 years' time. For the moment he is avoiding the question, and insists that he will concentrate for the next 5 years on serving Istanbul, a sprawling metropolis of 15 million inhabitants, a quarter of whom live below the poverty line. Right now I am a person who is fully concentrated on governing, he told foreign journalists at a news briefing on his first day in office last Friday. But if there are those who see our star high in the sky, we thank them. There is no doubt that he presents a broader threat to the president. Mr. İmamoğlu said he fully intended to use the enormous popular support that elected him by a surprisingly wide margin in a rerun on June 23 as a mandate to push back against Mr. Erdogan's authoritarianism and bring democracy and fairness to all of Turkey. It turned into the struggle of a nation, the new mayor said of the election, which was redone after Mr. Erdogan's party alleged irregularities and challenged its loss in a March vote. This was an election about Istanbul, it was at the same time a struggle for democracy. Behind him is the Republican People's Party, or CHP, Turkey's oldest political party. It was founded by the country's first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and is the main challenger to Mr. Erdogan's dominance of the political scene. Since Mr. Erdogan swept to power with his Justice and Development Party, or AKP, in elections in 2002, the opposition has failed to dislodge him or prevent him from expanding his control over Turkey's institutions, many of which are proud creations of the Atatürk legacy. In fact, the opposition party had failed in so many elections that it seemed doomed to represent a dwindling portion of society, the secular elite who were increasingly moving abroad. The party was struggling to combat the growing perception that Mr. Erdogan was unbeatable, said Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the party chairman since 2010. Its share of the vote had stalled at around 25%, while Mr. Erdogan's Justice and Development Party was polling at 45 to 50%. Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, a 70-year-old former bureaucrat, has worked quietly to turn that around. 9 years in opposition taught him that the Republican People's Party had to not only renew itself, but also open up both to the intellectual and academic world and to ordinary people. Instead of criticizing Mr. Erdogan, it needed to offer solutions for people's problems, he said in an interview at his party headquarters in the capital, Ankara. He turned to winning over Mr. Erdogan's supporters, the majority of whom are working class and the urban poor, targeting specific sectors such as subcontractors, and talking to people in their own neighborhoods. There were major differences between our language and that of AKP, he said. We developed a language that their supporters would listen to. We found the opportunity to talk in their space. The party encountered a widespread feeling of injustice in society, not just because of the arrests and purges that Mr. Erdogan ordered after a failed coup in 2016, but from a far wider constituency across the country who thought justice could not prevail. Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu led a 250-mile march for justice from Ankara to Istanbul in the summer of 2017, drawing hundreds of thousands of participants in a cross-party effort to engage society. The party also had to reckon with its undemocratic past. For the early decades of the Republic it was the only party, and it carries political baggage of being almost commensurate with the state. It is still criticized for elitism and past discrimination against ethnic minorities and Islamists. Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, himself an Alevi, one of Turkey's religious minorities, said he had encouraged party representatives to embrace self-criticism, especially when talking to AKP supporters, and sought closer relations with smaller democratic parties. The most important recent development has been the party's success in getting mayors elected in 6 of Turkey's most important cities, thanks to careful profiling of its candidates, and due in part to an alliance with other opposition parties. Mr. İmamoğlu is one of 6 mayors whom the party sees as its new generation of politicians who can reach out beyond its traditional base. Most do not come from the existing ranks of the party's lawmakers. It is one of our duties to make this sustainable, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu said. Our work starts now. We have to make a success of it, and maintain our relations with the other parties who are siding with democracy. The day after his inauguration, Mr. İmamoğlu met with journalists from around the world to announce a strategy of openness and transparency that he said he hoped would draw millions more tourists and investment to Istanbul. He said he would seek to work with Mr. Erdogan, and noted that the president had wished him success in a speech to his parliamentary group 2 days after the election. As we reconcile, we can make this country and this city gain a lot, the mayor said of his relations with Mr. Erdogan. I am entirely in that mood. I will demand this insistently, and together we will watch the reflex of Mr. President. But he also signaled that he would fight Mr. Erdogan if the president tried to hinder his administration of the city. Immediately after the election, Mr. Erdogan's government issued a circular to limit the powers of city mayors to assign managers of companies that serve the municipalities, Mr. İmamoğlu said. The circular shifted the power from the mayor's office to the city council, where Mr. Erdogan's party often holds a majority. The Ankara municipality had already filed a complaint against the circular and had it annulled, Mr. İmamoğlu said. It was probably only the first of such attempts, he said, adding, there may be litigation beyond this point, too. He said he intended to use transparency and the force of public opinion to unblock bureaucratic resistance and overcome political obstacles thrown up by Mr. Erdogan. In his brief 17 days in office before the earlier election was annulled, he live-streamed council meetings for public viewing. This is as if they have not learned their lesson on June 23, Mr. İmamoğlu said of the government circular. We have seen that when political maneuvers bring deadlock rather than a solution, the will of the people, the will of the citizen is above everything. He said the pro-government news media would find that it had to tone down its hostility after the election result, too. I think this election taught them a lesson, he said. They learned libel and misleading news will not take them anywhere. The election results showed that the Turkish people did not accept being dictated to, he said. We proved that politicians or political parties that have the approach of whatever I say is right can never rule this nation, he said in a dig at Mr. Erdogan's increasingly authoritarian rule. If they behave so, when the day comes, the nation will give them a lesson at the ballot box.